This week on Technicolor Blood, we're going to break down the Liam Neeson situation. That should be a lot of cheery fun.
And believe it or not, we have more Aquaman news.
Technicolor Blood starts right now. Technicolor Blood, we are back again. We appreciate everyone listening. My name is Chris. I'm joined as always by Terrence. Terrence, how are you this week?
I'm doing good. I watched a movie. Did you watch a movie?
Well, I did. I did actually watch the Fire Festival documentary that you recommended last week.
Ah, yeah. What'd you think of that?
I mean, you already talked about it, so we don't have to spend a lot of time, but I'll just add that I was just stunned by the complete and total lack of, I guess, self-awareness by Billy McFarland, and even more stunned by the fact that everyone around him seemed to believe in him so much, and I have no idea why, because to be honest, obviously the guy has a way with getting money from people, but he just kind of seemed like a clown to me.
Right. Hey, was his last name really McFarland?
Maybe. I hope so.
It's when you see him, he clearly looks a little like Seth MacFarlane. Like he looks like Seth's chunky older brother. Even though he's probably 20 years younger.
Let me confirm that, because that probably wouldn't. His name actually is McFarland.
Wow.
So I think it's actually Seth MacFarlane, Lane.
Okay.
But still, it's kind of a funny thing because he does look like Seth MacFarlane. So, yeah, chunky, sort of losery Seth MacFarlane,
and yet can convince anyone to give him another $1 million.
I know, just on such short notice too.
Yeah. Like it's a superpower. Like that guy just walks up to people and they turn into cash vending machines.
Yeah, but I guess the biggest lesson, the biggest takeaway from that documentary that I won't totally spoil since it's so new is, if we ever start running low on water, I know a good way to convince people to get us water, and you'll just have to watch the documentary to solve that one.
Yes.
Also, I will leave that to you. All right. So, Terrence, I have an inkling that you have seen something this week you'd like to discuss.
I did. So I went back ways and decided to watch a classic film, an indisputably classic film, and one that I think is kind of relevant to what's going on in today's world.
Is there stuff going on?
Yeah, a little bit in the news. There's occasional talk about some stuff. Yeah, well, anyway, the movie I saw was the 1976 classic All the President's Men. Which, for those of you who might not be totally familiar with it, is the fictionalized telling of the investigation into the break-in at the Watergate Hotel that led to the ultimate downfall of Richard Nixon as president. Classic film directed by Alan J. Pakula. It stars Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford, and then just a host of big-name actors from the 70s and 80s. Like, everybody is somebody. And that was actually kind of fun, because that movie is far enough into the past now, it's from 1976, that there was a time in my life when, like, I knew who all those actors were because I would see them in things, when I was a kid. I would see them in things, or I would see them on reruns of things. And then, times changed and the entire acting landscape of Hollywood switched to the next generation.
Right.
And those actors all sort of, retired or whatever happened to them. And so watching this movie again, there was, I recognized everybody, but I would have to like dig deep into the archives of my brain to like dredge up who that actor's name was and stuff. And I was
sure
just
that was fun for you.
Yeah. Like it's that feeling you get where you, like, once again, there's like this little reminder that, like, you've lived a really long time. You've lived long enough to forget stuff that you learned. And,
right.
I don't know. That was,
to be clear, you weren't exactly a teenager when that movie came out.
Well, no, I wasn't. I was a kid. But I mean, that like actors like Jack Warden and Jason Robards and Meredith Baxter Birney is like a crazy young wife in that movie and stuff. It's just that from that standpoint, it's a fun trip. But all right, all of that silliness aside, if the question is, does that movie hold up? Man, that movie absolutely holds up. Sure. Like, you could release that movie today and it would still be a Best Picture nomination.
I wonder if we did a Google search, if we would find some sort of a remake situation going on there. I know it's based on true events like that, so that wouldn't really set it up the same way. But there has to be some sort of similar vein movie. In fact, I'm shocked that there haven't been already a bunch of, Trump-centered, politically centered movies coming up in development that we haven't heard a lot about.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of this movie, it came out in 76. So, I mean, it came out just a few years after Nixon went down. So it's a fairly contemporary telling of those events. I think probably Hollywood wisely chooses to wait till the outcome of those events have happened before they want to tell those stories.
Sure.
So, but yeah, I have no doubt that, depending on how things turn out with the current president, that we'll be seeing a modern version of this kind of a story before too long.
Sure.
And just to touch on a few more of the highlights from it, the acting is of course top notch, and you expect that from Robert Redford because like Robert Redford has always been Robert Redford. He's never had a lull in his career where he would do silly things for a paycheck, whereas Dustin Hoffman definitely has had that period in his career. So to watch like a young, thin, in his prime Dustin Hoffman just being a brilliant actor, like that was such a reminder of how incredibly talented he was. Just man, in the 70s, he really was one of the greats. And those two guys playing off each other just so good. And it sort of leads into, this is that period of time in filmmaking where, every filmmaker and, Pakula had a long successful directing career up till this point. So he was like well-versed in how Hollywood movies were made. But, the 70s was that time frame when everyone was pushing for this very real, very natural way of making movies and especially getting performances from actors, so there's a lot of scenes where the actors are talking over each other and interrupting each other. And, that's stuff that you would never seen in movies before the 70s. That was unheard of, and here they do it so much. And there are a bunch of moments where, the performances are so natural that Redford will flub a line and then just like keep going with it.
Yeah.
And you can't tell if it's deliberate or not.
Right.
Like if he actually screwed up a word and he's just, they just keep rolling. So he just works through
Which
it.
is what happens in normal human speech patterns.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like it's, if you're probably just watching a movie as a casual movie observer, you don't even notice that sort of thing. But, I'm just like, I spend the rest of that scene going, did he mean to do that?
Yeah.
There's this awesome moment where Dustin Hoffman he's a smoker. And so literally every scene in that movie, he lights up a cigarette at one point or another. And there's a scene where it's a 2-shot of him and Redford, and they're like sitting on the couch in the newspaper editor's office. And, Hoffman gestures with his hand or whatever, and the ashes of his cigarette like fall off of the cigarette onto the couch. Right. And so for the rest of the scene, you notice them fall and they're just sitting like as a little pile on the couch.
Yep.
And at the very end of the scene, there's a moment where like Redford turns to say something to Hoffman and he notices it. And you see him like reach over and like sweep him off the couch, like apologetically to the editor. And again, like, so for like almost miss the next scene of the movie because I'm like, did they plan that? or did they just like ad lib that? Like the performances are so natural, it's impossible to tell one way or another.
Yeah. That sounds like a happy accident to me. Obviously, I'd have to watch it again. But.
Yeah. And Ben, when was the last time you saw that in a modern movie? Like, when was the last time you even saw actors flub lines or, say the wrong person's name? Or
in the studio picture, I can't remember the last time. But I know that early on in First Reformed, there was a scene where Amanda Seyfried clearly flubbed a line, and she and Ethan Hawke just kept going with it. It was very, very early in the morning in the movie. But yeah, in a studio picture, I feel like that's just something that everyone had. The culture has become, okay, we have to stop and fix this instead of just letting the scene kind of breathe.
Right. Yeah. And it makes sense in First Reform because it was directed by Paul Schrader, and I mean he is boiled into 70s filmmaking.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, I'm glad you checked that one out. I always am happy to have 70s movies come up on the podcast, which for sure at some point I know we'll do more content on 70s films, since that's a golden era as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. Watching this movie makes me think we could probably do entire episodes devoted to some of the really great films from the 70s.
Sure. No doubt about it. All right, some news and development news now. Let's talk about this joyful story. Liam Neeson.
Oh my God. So this This story feels like a prototypical example of a tiny story happens and then social media gets their hands on it and it just suddenly becomes big and stupid.
Yeah. So this would be our friend Outrage again, but we want to give we want to try to examine this from either side a little bit. So Liam Neeson, obviously big time actor, he has made quite a career for himself, especially in the last 15 years or so in these sort of very personal revenge films.
Yeah.
And he was doing press for his latest revenge film called Cold Pursuit. And during this interview with Independent, I got this from independent.co.uk, which I believe is a film magazine from the UK. He sort of was talking about what happens to people and how they go from a normal everyday person into someone who might be filled with rage, sort of trying to connect to, I guess, the audience and how, with his new film. So he basically says in this interview, he volunteers out of the blue that about 40 years ago, and this would have been sometime when he was in his mid-20s, as he's 66 now.
Right.
A good friend of his, a female friend of his, was raped, and he came back from overseas, or he was off somewhere, and he came back and he found out about this. And he asked her what happened, and she didn't really give him much detail other than the assailant, the rapist, was black. And so Liam Neeson, again, totally unsolicited, brings this up out of nowhere. And the context here, the important part of it is that he's explaining to this person his regret for how he felt back then, which is what he did was he literally just walked the streets for a couple of weeks with a blunt weapon hidden on his person, waiting for a black person basically to stumble out of a pub. He would walk around where, people were drinking, like where the nightlife was, waiting for a black person to come out and have a go at him, as he said. And the words he used were, and he actually used hand air quotes during the interview where he said he was waiting for a, quote, black bastard to come at him. And so, but following that, the context is he was very regretful of that. He is not proud of that. And he sort of used that to tie it in. He was actually sitting with one of his cast members when this happened, and the cast member had sort of a reaction that you might expect, which is, oh shit.
Yeah.
And so the conversation went on, and then this sort of blew up. And a lot of obviously mixed feelings about this. And let's just be honest here. We're two white males, so we're not representing. We can't represent the black community here or how folks like that feel about it. But to me, the context is so important here that he is volunteering this out of the blue, talking about how much regret he has, and that doesn't make his feelings okay at the time. But I think we have to have some room for people to grow and change as a person. And again, it doesn't change what happened in the past, but this isn't a thing that got dug up from his past that he just says, okay, well, I admit this happened. And I think that's a pretty big difference.
Yeah. And I mean, to complete what he was saying, he also goes on to say that, after doing this for, a week, like he sort of came to the realization that what he was doing was crazy.
Yeah.
That, he had lost his mind and that this was a terrible thing. And he was just flat out lucky that that nothing came of this.
Yeah.
And that, he wasn't spending the rest of his life in jail or something.
Yeah. I may not have included this, but he literally said in the article that his intent was to kill this person, whoever came out at him.
Yeah.
He had the weapon. He was waiting for someone to have a go at him so that he would kill them. That was his words.
Right.
So, I mean, that is obviously very bad. Obviously, there was a very traumatic event that happened in his life. Well, happened to someone close to him, and that can make you do things you wouldn't ordinarily do. Now, it's not going to make you a racist.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the gray area is a little bit.
Well, I mean, to really compliment the Independent on this, the article that they wrote all this up in it's really excellent. And if you've heard about this story and you want details or context for it before you make any decisions, going back and reading the original article from the Independent is definitely the way to go.
Which you should always do.
Yeah, absolutely. But in it, a couple of points that they make, which I think are worth bringing up at least, is that, as you pointed out, this happened 40 years ago. At the time, Neeson was living in Northern Ireland.
Yep.
And this would have been basically at the height of what they refer to as the Troubles.
Right.
So this was the time period when the IRA was bombing people, blowing up pubs. They were actively committed to this terrorist guerrilla war against the English occupation of Ireland. And, in the middle of this, you've got, it's kind of a violent period of time. And, everything, emotions and tempers, all of that are just, kind of the ragged edge. The Independent also, to their credit, they go on and they talk to a representative from a national rape counseling service. And she points out that, this is not entirely uncommon, especially among the spouse of someone who's been raped. They're like, no one ever thinks that those people need counseling to help them through this experience either. So they usually go without getting any sort of treatment. And he's like, so thoughts of guilt and anger for the spouse and the boyfriend of someone who was raped, like that's really common. So Neeson's reaction is not unusual at all.
Yeah.
They even go as far as to interview like a professor who deals with like race studies. And that person made the point that it's real common that when people have a negative experience with someone from a particular demographic, whether it be racial or age related, it's real common for them to take that experience and apply it to the entire group as a racial stereotype. And, when you read all of that and take it into context, it's just remarkable that Neeson volunteered this information, was so bluntly honest about it. And then I think within the context of the article, you kind of realize that him talking about it is in a way illustrating how he came to grips with it.
Sure.
And how it's ridiculous to try to envision him as being a racist today because of these very natural emotional reactions he had 40 years ago. Now, obviously, taking the action that he took to go out and try to initiate or at least put himself in a position to initiate a confrontation with somebody, that's messed up. Yeah. But again, he's in his 60s now. He's hardly the same person now as he was then.
We've all done a lot of stuff we're not proud of.
Yeah.
Whether it has anything to do with anything racially motivated or anything else. And I was a moron when I was in my 20s,
Yeah.
Like, it's just. So
and a moron in their 20s in Ireland is probably very.
Are you stereotyping right now? No, I just think the context of him volunteering this is very important. It was almost like it was therapeutic for him to bring it up again. Now, of course, you could also argue that, well, okay, but why is he doing this to promote a movie? That seems to cheapen it. But I disregard that. I just feel like it was more about how in the times right now there's so much stuff going on, and it's just one of those things that he pulled from his head that he has a regret about. And yeah, it ties into his movie also. But I just think the fact that he brought it up on his own and discussed it so openly. He had it in his
emotionally,
heart,
because like you can hear his voice trembling as he's talking about it.
If he still had that in his heart, or if he even really ever had it in his heart, he would never volunteer that now. That's I think it sounds like we kind of agree on this, and I would love to hear other opinions on this, but I'll tell you this, I don't really want to hear anyone's opinion on this unless they read and hear the full context of this.
Yes.
That's an absolute must.
And I want to make one last point, and then we can walk away from this. And that is, he has since then gone on to other interviews where, of course, this has been a topic that's been brought up. And he has not backed down on any of it. I mean, he just tells the same story again in exactly the same honest way.
Yeah.
I mean, I kudos to him for not listening to whatever PR firm is just like, you've got to
begging him to apologize.
Yeah, exactly. Profusely. Hide this someplace and just try to get past it or whatever.
Yeah. All right. How about some actual movie and development news here? One article that caught my eye this week is that Paramount is apparently pulling the plug. We don't know if it's permanent or not, but they're pulling the plug on the World War Z sequel.
I was about to say nobody knew was coming.
I was going to say long anticipated, but no, that's not the case at all. No. The original did make something like $600 million worldwide, which kind of surprised me.
Yeah.
But they had started pre-production on this, and the issues that they note in the article are that they had budgetary concerns. Mark Forster directed the original, but David Fincher was actually going to direct the sequel, which to me makes it a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
And so the thing that there's two other things that I think cross with the timing of this that I think are kind of interesting. Well, two other stories that intersect with it. Timing wise, I believe this announcement was made the day of or the day after the Zack Snyder Netflix zombie movie was announced. So, I mean, obviously, somehow the appetite for zombie stuff is insatiable. So I don't think that had anything to do with it. I just thought it was kind of an interesting parallel.
I see what you did there, insatiable zombies.
Totally on purpose. And the other thing that I saw in this article that I didn't realize is another one of the reasons that played into the budgetary concerns is the current issues going on between the US and China. But a little bit deeper than that, apparently China has banned zombie content for their movies and entertainment over there. I have never heard of this.
Oh, well, that's interesting. I wonder if... Okay, so, they released recently that PG-13 version of Deadpool, and one of the reasons for that recut of the movie was because they could not get Deadpool 2 into China. And technically, couldn't you argue that the Deadpool character is a zombie because he can't be killed?
I mean, technically, you could make that argument, sure.
So I wonder if that's why they couldn't get Deadpool into China, and if the recut, which I have not seen, somehow tones down the zombie nature of his character, and that's what allowed them to slip that in?
Could be. I think specifically the issue is about the makeup and the look of zombies.
Oh, okay.
So maybe because in Deadpool he doesn't have the mask off too often.
Yeah.
Maybe they're only editing those portions. I'm not sure. This apparently dates back to sometime in like 2015. And there's been some sort of gray area with the movies and the entertainment over in China, but this played into apparently one of the reasons where they're going to have an income stream there that's just not going to be there. So that apparently was part of the calculus. Another thing in there that I thought that was interesting was that they're not saying if the movie is officially completely shelved permanently. They're leaving the door cracked open a little bit to a smaller budget with a different director. But apparently the current project with Fincher and his preferred budget, which was something like 190 million, is totally off the table. Yeah.
Wow.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Especially for Fincher.
Right.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of an interesting one. Another one here. There was some Woody Allen news this week.
Yeah.
It seems like every couple of years there's some Woody Allen news.
Anytime Woody Allen pops up in the news, it's never a good thing.
Yeah. So he had a production deal with Amazon, and it was for an estimated $68 to $73 million to produce content exclusively for Amazon. And based on an article that I guess Woody's son, Ronan Farrow, wrote a couple of years back, that basically recounted things that Amazon was already, I don't want to say Amazon was already aware of, but the general public was already aware of. So you assume that Amazon was aware of.
Yeah.
Things that were already out in the public about Woody Allen possibly allegedly molesting, and I think the word I saw was over grooming his 7-year-old child, and just gross stuff like that. So this was already out there when the deal was made.
Yeah. And
so I guess they're recanting on it, and Woody Allen is obviously suing to recoup some of that money that he feels like is due to him. I don't know the contractual ins and outs about what it was in the contract that allowed Amazon to sort of terminate the deal. Mm-hmm. But I think it's pretty interesting considering it's based on something that the public already knew about. Yeah,
there's no good guy in any of the story. I mean, Woody Allen is gross, right? There's no disputing that. But on top of it, I mean, like you said, all of this was public knowledge. And Amazon, before they ever entered a contract with this guy, they did their due diligence. Yeah. They all knew.
They made this bed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So them backing out of the financial end of it, I don't know. That's all.
The other thing about this story that sort of it got under my radar was the idea that there's a big name legendary director who signed an exclusive deal with a streaming service a couple of years ago. And somehow that sort of flew under my radar. I figured that would have been a bigger deal. And I'm sure the reason is because although Woody Allen is considered a legendary historic director, he's not really a popular director. Like, say, if this had been J.J. Abrams or something, it would have been a massive, huge deal.
Yeah. And, it's important to remember, too, that a lot of these deals where big name creative types sign some sort of exclusive multi-picture deal with an outlet, a lot of times it just never leads anywhere. They're never able to develop anything that outlet has an interest in making. A perfect example of that was when Jon Stewart left Comedy Central and signed this great deal with HBO, basically for carte blanche. Whatever he wanted to make, they were going to finance. And, years and years later, still nothing's come of that really. So
yeah. I only saw something about there's some animated series coming, and then that didn't even happen.
Yeah. So, I mean, it happens. This might have been another one of those cases where, they just could never really find something that both parties were interested in making.
Sure. All right, so a few weeks back, there were rumors about Henry Cavill being out as Superman in the DC universe. And of course, we have reiterated our position on this. He's fine as Superman. The movies around him are bad, just like with Ben Affleck. He was fine as Batman. The movies around him were bad.
Yep.
So I guess that sort of cooled. And I think he made some sort of an Instagram post afterwards that was kind of tongue in cheek that made it very clear that, okay, he's not actually out at all. But apparently one of the rumored issues that was keeping the next Superman Henry Cavill movie like that focused on him as Superman, one of the issues that kept him from being made, a rumor was that Henry Cavill wanted to have a decision in the final script and in the director.
And he wanted a producer credit.
Okay. And Henry Cavill's team actually shot this rumor down recently. So who knows if it was true or maybe it's not true anymore. I don't know.
Right.
But apparently that is not the case. So the way is clear, at least from Henry Cavill's side, to get on to the next Superman movie. And still there's nothing in pre-production that I'm aware of, which is so weird because DC keeps making all these secondary and even tertiary characters.
Right.
But here we are, we're 2 years away from the next Batman movie, which we don't have a Batman for.
Right.
I guess it's not going to be Keanu Reeves. And we're also, God knows how long away from the two tentpole characters of that universe. There's nothing. But we got Aquaman and we got Shazam and we got Wonder Woman. I mean, it's so strange to me.
So the really surprising thing about this rumor was, okay, I get that maybe they wouldn't want to give him a producer credit, although, why not? Producer credits are like candy. Hollywood gives them out left and right.
Sure.
And I totally understand that they're never going to give an actor final approval over who they pick as a director. Like that's a non-starter from the beginning.
Yeah.
But why should he not have script approval?
Sure.
Like he is the only thing they have, right? Like Snyder's not coming back to direct another Superman movie. So the biggest name attached to the Superman property is the actor, the star, right? Why would he ever sign back onto that project if the script is bad?
Yeah.
I mean,
and his star is on the rise,
Yeah, absolutely.
He just was in a mega successful Mission Impossible movie. And he's
got that Witcher series coming out soon.
They're shooting that Witcher series for Netflix right now, which I think has the potential to be a pretty big deal once it hits.
Yeah, I think I agreed. All signs point to that being a big potential franchise.
Yeah, maybe DC just internally doesn't. Maybe they just have this feeling that they need to wipe the slate clean. And I can't really blame them for that so much. But in this particular specific case, I do like Cavill as Superman, so I'd really like to see what he could do. With a script, and a director that isn't crap. Yeah,
before he leaves, like Affleck did, just give the guy one opportunity to make a good movie.
Yeah.
It hasn't been his fault that he's been in all these other films. He's doing his job. Just give him a chance.
Yep. All right, another bit of here's a bit of development news, which I thought was kind of interesting. When I first saw this, I thought, Tom Hanks and Paul Greengrass are going to reunite for a movie called News of the World. So when I heard that, when I saw that headline, I thought to myself, okay, this is probably some, like a journalism movie set in modern day. It turns out this actually, for me, has an interesting twist on it. So Paul Greengrass, if you don't know, he's done a couple of the Bourne movies. He did the Captain Phillips with Tom Hanks was the last time they worked together.
Okay.
He did the United 93, Flight 93, 9/11 movie. He also did a recent Netflix movie that I talked about where it was, I think it was called July 22 or something, about a terrorist attack. Anyway, so they're reuniting for this movie. The setting for this movie is actually Tom Hanks plays a character in the post-Civil War time in 1870 whose job is to carry the news of the war throughout the country, I guess going to different communities and I assume probably bringing news of the dead and discussing things like that. And along the way, he gets tasked with escorting someone to, like I think a kid or something, to Fort Worth where his family had been killed or something, and they need to get this kid back. And so it's like a road picture to get this kid or this person back to their home. So the setting of this alone intrigues me. I like Civil War era stuff,
right?
And I don't think I could be wrong about this, but certainly none of Paul Greengrass's more notable films are period pieces.
No.
So I'm super curious to see what he does because he has a very modern style of directing.
Yeah.
So and I don't think that will necessarily translate. Like you couldn't think of maybe like Michael Mann directing a movie that took place in the 1700s. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he would
have to alter his style. And Paul Greengrass is kind of that, whipping the camera around, documentary style, like frantic documentary style sort of filmmaking. So I'm curious to see if he will alter his style a little bit, or if he's going to carry that into the 1870s, which would be super strange to me.
Yes, it would be strange, and I can't help but think of Martin Scorsese's Gangs of New York.
Yeah,
where his modern style just does not work well.
Right, with some there was like modern musical cues in that. And it was a little strange.
Yeah, I rewatched that movie about 2 years ago, and it's everything you remember it being.
Yeah, those actors couldn't save it. Like otherwise talented actors that are just like, I don't know what's happening here.
Yeah, they just look completely confused and awkward the entire time.
All right, you got some James Cameron news for us.
Yeah, I mean, just very, very, very thin James Cameron news, but the potential for it is so exciting that I think it's worth mentioning. So Cameron, he's super busy right now. He's working on the next 2 sequels to the Avatar movies. A few weeks ago, they had announced that they were done with photography on them, but now I've read that that's not true and that they're just ramping up photography on one of them.
For the love of God.
And I think what's going on is they're shooting all the motion capture stuff at one time, and then they're shooting all the actual live action stuff at another time. So I think they've wrapped the motion capture performance filming for both films now.
Okay.
And now they're beginning the actual live action actors on a set.
We're going to be 70 when these movies come out.
Yeah. So he's got those 2 going on. Also, apparently, somehow he got talked into coming back as a producer for the new Terminator film. So Terminator 6, after having nothing to do with that franchise since Terminator 2.
That's crazy.
He's now back on number 6 as a producer somehow. I don't know.
Yeah, really need to know how much of a creative capacity that will be, if any at all.
Yeah, so in sort of conjunction with that, he was recently asked about maybe coming back to the Aliens franchise. And the person who was interviewing him or whatever actually said, maybe you could give Neil Blomkamp a call and make a new Aliens movie. And James Cameron's response was, I'm working on that.
Oh, interesting.
So a little context for that is about 2 years ago, after Ridley Scott had come back and made one new Aliens film, which was called Prometheus. And that didn't really do too well, and fans didn't really seem to care about it too much. Neil Blomkamp, the director of District 9 and Chappie, he got interested in making a new Aliens film that would sort of pick up from where James Cameron's Alien film ended and just sort of retcon the whole rest of that messy franchise to sort of go away.
Right.
And everyone got real excited about that. And he got Sigourney Weaver to agree to come on board, and he did a bunch of production artwork to get people excited. And I mean, it all looked great. It all went, was really, really exciting. Fox shot that down. And instead, they put all their money on Ridley Scott and gave him the opportunity to make another prequel movie, which was Alien Covenant. That didn't do too well. Critics didn't like it. Fans didn't like it.
I finally saw it. Yeah.
I've still never bothered to see it. But so in the background, everyone's still been really curious and excited about the possibility of Blomkamp coming on and doing another Aliens film. So this comment from Cameron, and I mean, who knows, he might have just been joking around. There's no real context to it. And, it's just one sentence.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a pretty exciting idea that you could get Cameron to come back to Aliens, and he could bring along this hot young director who is clearly dying to make an Aliens movie.
Yep.
And, Sigourney Weaver obviously gets along with both those people and would be happy to come back and reprise her role again. It's kind of an exciting possibility if it could happen.
I feel like Neil Blomkamp would have done an Alien movie by now, had it not been for Chappie. That was just such a disaster.
He really, really tried, but I mean, Fox was just set on working with Ridley Scott on this.
Yeah, and man, I would love it if, of course, we'll be in the grave 30 years before this happens, and James Cameron will be 107 and still making movies. But I would love to see him actually direct another Alien movie, because I love the bookend of James Cameron, or of Ridley Scott doing the original, James Cameron doing the sequel, which there's a legitimate fight about which one of those two movies is better. Usually the original is always better. I prefer the original, but it's close for me.
Oh yeah.
And I'll listen to anyone who says the second one's better. That's a fine argument.
Sure.
And so I love the idea that at the end of sort of our time on this earth, those movies being made where Ridley did a couple and then maybe James Cameron would come back and do one as well. I love that sort of maybe it's like an unspoken rivalry that they have. I don't know. They may hate each other for all I know, but I just love the idea of them sort of creatively bouncing back and forth like that. But I know with Cameron, there's almost no chance that he'll direct it. And if he does, we might not be well enough to actually open our eyes and watch it, or we'll be dead.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, all for him to direct it, all of it would have to happen after he's finished, 4 more Avatar movies?
Right.
Like, I don't even know
and then
what
probably
the
take a
number is up
sabbatical
now.
to go underwater again.
Yeah, like he's got to go find some more sunken ships, and he's got some sort of asteroid mining company that he started as well.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that guy is.
Can I just buy stock in James Cameron? Is that
right?
possible?
No kidding. Yeah, he seems to be like the one rich, crazy billionaire out there that, you only hear about because he's doing cool stuff and not because he's, picking fights with the National Enquirer or whatever else is
Right,
going
yeah,
on.
exactly. Brilliant, legendary, super creative supernova of director. And so there's no way to transition to a story you have about an Aquaman spinoff.
What? You don't think that's the perfect segue? All right. So recently,
Yeah, let's just get through this. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's been an announcement from Warner Brothers that they are exploring the possibility of doing a spin-off to the Aquaman movie. So this movie would not have any of the actors or characters from the Aquaman movie. Instead, all they want to explore is making a horror movie about the creatures that lived in the trench. Mm-hmm. So if you've seen Aquaman, you might remember that at one point in the film, there's this like bizarre sequence that really isn't super connected to the rest of the film, where they have to descend down into a deep trench to get into this other part of the magical undersea kingdoms that they're exploring. And living inside this trench are these like weird fish people, right? So we first see them coming up to the surface and attacking the boat that Aquaman and
there's
Miron.
that big trailer moment shot where it's almost like there's like a red flare or something that's underwater, and there's like a big spiral of them. I think if I remember coming.
Yeah.
It was probably visually one of the highlights in the movie.
I would agree. Yeah. I mean, and so you can kind of see why people latched onto it, and there's an interest in it.
Right.
Warner Brothers is they're interested in actually making a standalone movie that would be a horror movie that would just throw some more of that crazy stuff at you. And which on the surface, I was like, man, that's a really thin thread to pluck for an entire movie.
Right.
But when you read deeper into it, it turns out that this is a thing that was introduced into the comic books like in 2012.
Okay.
And the comic books have actually explored it further.
Okay.
And it's always been used as like this really creepy, horror-laced element that they've kind of delved into and played with a little bit. So it turns out, I guess, there really is some mythology for them to play with there. And, you and I, not big horror films, but I mean, a horror movie set in the ocean, I mean, that's intriguing and different enough that I would definitely be on board for that.
Yeah. So,
no pun.
So yeah, just talking through this, let me tell you how my perspective on it has changed.
You love Aquaman.
Just
start there.
Just the idea of an Aquaman spinoff is offensive to me because I hated the movie so much. But the fact that this from the beginning is going to be conceived as a horror movie, that helps a little bit because, James Wan is a horror director, and he's obviously not going to direct this one, but that whole movie had sort of that kitschy horror feel to it a lot of the time, but it actually fit for these characters. So if they set off to not make a superhero movie or a comic book movie necessarily, but actually to make a sort of a mashup of a comic book and a horror film, that actually is kind of intriguing, and the setting also intrigues me.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's going to depend on the plot and who the actual main characters are and what role these creatures really are. They just constantly the foil? Like, is it deeper than that? I don't know. But deeper, another unintentional pun. So I guess just talking through it, the fact that it's actually being conceived as a horror film, I guess I'll be a little bit easier on this as we watch it go through the development phase here.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's kind of intriguing, and I'm curious to see where it leads. So we have a little bit of sad news to bring up. I think it's worth mentioning that legendary longtime actor Albert Finney has passed away. He's died at the age of 82, and he's one of those actors that has been the lead in a lot of things, but I think most people probably don't know the name.
He's one of those classic, hey, it's that guy, character actor kind of guys.
Yeah, very much a character actor. Just been in so many movies, been around forever. It's kind of worth just mentioning that, he was a great, super well respected by other actors. And just to give you some context, we might name a few of the movies that he was in.
Sure. He's been his first appearance in an acting role was way back in 1956. To give you an idea of how long his career has been. If you're a little bit of a younger listener, or you're just not like a super huge movie fan, and you're just starting to get into movies and you don't recognize him because he doesn't have a credit since 2012. So it looks like he's been either by choice or not been retired for a few years. But check out some of his filmography. I'm sure you'll recognize a lot of the names in there. He was nominated for 5 Oscars over the course of his career, spanning a lot of time, which is another impressive feat. His first acting nomination was for Best Actor in 1964 for the film Tom Jones. He was then a decade later, 11 years later, nominated for Best Actor for Murder on the Orient Express. And then another 9 years later, so he's like hitting all these decades, once a decade basically. So another 9 years later, he was nominated for Best Actor in The Dresser. And then the very next year, in 1985, so back-to-back years, he was nominated for Best Actor for Under the Volcano. Then disappeared for a long time. Then, of course, probably his most famous role, it would be my guess, is he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor in Aaron Brockovich in 2001. So long career and all these nominations that spanned several decades. I'd have to go back and look. I'm sure maybe like a Meryl Streep and like Glenn Close and like De Niro, like those guys, those actors and actresses have had many nominations over many decades, but it's a very small amount of people that have had that, I'm sure.
Yeah, no doubt.
And just a couple of I guess trivia tidbits that I learned about Albert Finney reading up. He never was interested in awards. He never attended a single Academy Awards show when he was nominated.
Oh, got to respect that.
He just had no interest. And this other one, which I thought was really interesting, because this is he was actually offered a knighthood, and he turned it down. I don't know the reason. He just wasn't interested. He just wasn't a guy who liked the public spotlight very much for an actor, which is interesting.
Yeah,
he just kind of wanted to do his thing and move on. I should say, his most famous role, maybe is Aaron Brockovich, but he also played like the heavy in Miller's Crossing. That's probably the role I think of most when I think of Albert Finney. He has that. If you haven't seen Miller's Crossing, it's a Coen Brothers movie. There's a very famous scene where he's like I think he's like a mob boss, and he's in his home, and there's like some assailants that break into his home, and he has this great like classic scene where he has like a Tommy gun, and he just mows all these guys, these couple of guys down, and kills them when they're in his home trying to kill him, and he's chomping on a cigar the whole time. And he famously, sort of like Indiana Jones never loses his hat. He famously he's like chomping on that big cigar the entire time he's just machine gunning these people to death. So that was a big one for Albert Finney.
Yeah, and in more recent years, just so people who are more casual moviegoers or more up to date moviegoers realize you've definitely seen this guy in a lot of movies. I mean, he was in Big Fish. He was one of the voices in Corpse Bride. He was in a couple of the Bourne movies, and his last role,
the Bourne movies,
and in his last role, and what a great role to go out on, he was in Skyfall, the James Bond movie from 2012, and he plays the Alfred the Butler character, not named Alfred, but since Skyfall is essentially the Batman movie.
Right.
That's his role. So even if you are only familiar with real recent movies, you've definitely seen this guy in several big films.
Yeah, he had an uncredited appearance in one of the Ocean's 11 sequels. He was actually in Traffic, which is one of my favorites from the 2000s.
Yeah, sure.
Just lots of stuff. Like Terrence said, you don't know, if you don't know his name, you'll definitely know his face. He's just that guy. He's been around so much and very respected.
When I heard he had passed away, my first thought was his role as Ebenezer Scrooge in the film Scrooge.
Right. Yep. If
you're a big fan of a Christmas Carol and you watch it every year at Christmas time, if you've seen a wide variety of them, again, I assure you've definitely seen him as Ebenezer Scrooge in one of them.
Yep. He's a great one. Rest in peace. Wanted to end it on a couple of fun notes here. So, things I learned from film Twitter. Since we've started the podcast and we started interacting with folks on Twitter via our Twitter account @TechBloodPod, by the way, I've had a lot of interesting interactions. And one thing that I've noticed is So this doesn't actually fit into my category today of things I learned, but one of the early things I learned was that people were clamoring for the Snyder cut of Justice League or whatever.
Right.
I'm just going to dismiss that out of hand. But since this is related, another thing that I didn't realize was that, so there's this news about the Trench film we just talked about from Aquaman, and I saw a lot of people on Twitter who were were enraged by the fact that DC is bothering to make a Aquaman spinoff, but they won't make Man of Steel 2. So apparently there's tons and tons of folks who are clamoring for Man of Steel 2. And I guess this shouldn't surprise me because I know those movies, even though I think we both think they're all pretty terrible, there's just such a fervent following for them. So just add this to the list of things that I didn't know there was an appetite for, that apparently there is a tremendous appetite for. Yeah,
I'm going to give humanity the benefit of the doubt and believe what they mean is they just want to see another Henry Cavill Superman movie. Not that they literally want an extension of the Man of Steel movie, which was garbage.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks that disagree with you on that. I'm not one of them because
you're
did not
right
care for that movie,
and they're all wrong.
So that was something I learned. Something even more interesting that I learned. Okay, so you and I bag on M. Night Shyamalan a lot.
Deservedly so.
Because he has made a lot of terrible movies and one great one. So what I found out from Twitter is that I haven't even seen what apparently is universally thought of as his worst movie, which shocked me.
Wow, okay.
And that is that Last Airbender thing he did.
Yes.
Did you ever see that?
No.
I did not see that movie. And the fact that people that I know who even like M. Night Shyamalan are saying it's by far his worst movie kind of makes, because I know, I'd like to, I guess I secretly hate myself. It makes me want to see this movie.
Okay.
I have to see how it compares to The Happening and Lady in the Water. And okay, I'm just going to stop there because I start to bleed internally, and I don't want to do that right now. So I was curious if you'd ever seen that, and
I have not, because that came out after I swore M. Night off.
Right.
I was like, this guy's dead to me.
Yep.
So there's a whole chunk of his filmography that I've just never bothered to see.
Right.
If you want to watch that movie, I'll watch it as well, and we can just discuss it.
I think I'd rather see Glass.
All right, fair
than
enough.
that one, but I don't know. Maybe down the line when I've watched every other movie in the world.
Yeah, man, that might be smart.
All right, you got something fun for us to close the show out?
Yeah, and this really is just fun. So if you were old enough to remember the internet from the early 90s, then this is a treat for you. Kind of brilliantly, the Marvel Captain Marvel movie is set in 1995, as you can probably tell from the trailers, or at least you can tell it's not current age because Samuel L. Jackson looks young in it. But anyway, it is set in 1995, and so brilliantly, the marketing for that film has designed the official website for the movie to look like a website from the early 90s.
It's amazing. Oh my God.
It is amazing. I mean, it is.
Holy cow.
I haven't seen a website from the 90s since the 90s. But the moment I clicked on it, it just all came rushing back to me. I was like, oh my God, yes, this is what the entire internet was like.
Yep. Oh my God. It is brilliant.
It is so well done.
All the little moving widgets all over the place.
Yes. Oh my God.
And I love the little green digital hit counter.
Yes.
And it's just so classic.
Like, nothing is cohesive. It's just like somebody vomited 8-bit graphics all over the computer screen.
The fonts, the colors, the little moving graphics, the way the hyperlinks are set out, the banner ads. I mean, wow. I'm actually looking at this for the very first time as we're recording, and it's incredible. So yeah, if you have any memory of that time, you should definitely check it out. If you're too young to ever have seen that, get yourself a laugh by going on and checking out.
Check out what the internet was like when it was born.
Yeah, this is what we had to deal with.
Yeah, the only difference between this and what it was really like is this will load up on your computer instantly.
Right.
You don't have to wait several minutes for everything to slowly download.
Yeah, a page like this back in the 90s would have taken 45 minutes to load. There would have been no scrolling for quite a long time. Oh my God.
So much fun. So check it out. It's definitely worth a few minutes of your time.
All right. Yeah. Great pull there. All right. Thanks for listening again, guys. You can hit us up on Twitter at TechBloodPod, and please leave us a review on whatever platform you use to listen to your podcast. We'd really appreciate that. And Terrence, any final words for this episode?
Thank you so much for listening to the show, guys. We really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you next week.